What if the unthinkable happened? What if, in a shocking turn of events, Ukraine didn't just defend its own country, but launched a full-scale invasion of Russia? In our timeline, this long and brutal war has been a bloody fight of attrition, waged almost entirely on Ukrainian soil. It's a war of trench lines, artillery battles, and desperate struggles for cities that have been turned to rubble. But in this alternate reality, we're looking at a daring, almost unbelievable strategic gamble. A choice born from desperation that changes the rules of modern warfare and reshapes the world map forever. This is the story of how a desperate counterattack, meant to break a horrific stalemate, provoked a catastrophic response from a cornered Kremlin. It's the story of how the world was pushed to the very edge of total war. The catalyst. The Winter of Desperation. Our story begins in the bitter winter of 2026. For Ukraine, the situation is grim, maybe the grimmest it's been since the war began. Despite heroic resistance, the strategic reality is closing in. Russia, having shifted its economy and military onto a long war footing, is hitting a critical Ukrainian weakness: a severe shortage of air defense interceptors. Night after night, Russian ballistic and cruise missiles pound Kyiv, Lviv and Odessa. They're no longer just targeting energy infrastructure, but also hitting water supplies, transport hubs and residential areas with terrifying freedom. Ukraine's air defense, once a strong shield, is now full of holes. Crews can only shoot down a fraction of incoming threats, with some recent barrages seeing zero successful interceptions. On the ground, the front lines have become a hellscape that looks like something out of World War I. Russia is losing soldiers at a staggering rate, straining its ability to replace monthly casualties, yet it keeps grinding forward with attritional attacks. For the Ukrainian High Command, the math is simple and brutal. They are losing a war of resources against a much larger enemy. Another counter-offensive in the south or east would be a suicide mission, a repeat of past fights against deeply dug-in Russian defenses. It's in this moment of desperation that a new plan is born. It's radical, dangerous, and flips the entire script of the war on its head. The plan isn't to retake more Ukrainian land, but to seize Russian land. The goal isn't conquest, but to create a strategic shock so big it shatters the Kremlin's political will to continue. The logic is chilling. If Russia can make Ukrainian cities unlivable, then Ukraine has to bring the war home to Russia in a way that small drone strikes and border raids never could. They decide to gamble everything on a full-scale, combined arms invasion of Russia's border regions. The initial onslaught, 1,000 kilometers of shock. In the pre-dawn hours of a frozen January morning, the operation kicks off. It's a brilliant piece of misdirection. For weeks, Ukrainian intelligence fed Russian satellites and spies false signals, suggesting a build-up to defend Kharkiv. At the same time, elite brigades with the best remaining Western and domestic armour were quietly gathered further north, near the Sumy Oblast. This isn't a raid, it's a blitzkrieg. A massive, coordinated wave of FPV and long-range drones blinds Russian observation posts and hits command centres. Then, armoured columns punch through the border in several locations, rolling right past the modest defences Russia had in place. The Kremlin, having long dismissed the idea that Ukraine could launch a major offensive on Russian soil, was only ready for small incursions, not a multi-brigade invasion. The first targets are the Russian cities of Sudzha and Gryvoron, and dozens of surrounding towns in the Kursk and Belgorod oblasts. The speed of the attack is stunning. Russian border guards, mostly made up of conscripts and Rosgvardia units, are caught completely off guard and either surrender or are overrun. Within 48 hours, Ukrainian forces have pushed dozens of kilometers deep, cutting key railway lines that supply Russian troops in eastern Ukraine and carving out a chunk of occupied Russian territory over 1,000 square kilometers in size. The psychological impact is instant. In Moscow, the Ministry of Defense at first denies everything, calling the reports a mass terrorist attack that has been stopped. But social media is on fire with images of Ukrainian flags flying over Russian town halls and long lines of Russian prisoners of war. For the Russian people, who had been mostly shielded from the real costs of the war, the official story of a victorious special military operation completely falls apart overnight. The war is no longer something happening over there. It is here. The Kremlin's fury the patriotic war. The humiliation hits the Kremlin hard. For President Putin, this isn't just a military blunder, it's a political crisis that threatens his power. The unspoken deal he had with the Russian people, that their normal lives wouldn't be disrupted by the war, is broken. The shock and confusion quickly turn into white-hot rage. The response is swift, total, and has no limits. Putin appears on national television to address the nation. The language of a special operation is gone. He declares the Ukrainian invasion an existential attack on the motherland itself, all orchestrated by a decadent West trying to destroy Russia. He brings up the memory of the Great Patriotic War, declares martial law across Western Russia, and announces a full national mobilization. This is no longer a professional war fought by contract soldiers. It is now the duty of every Russian man to defend the homeland. The military response is even more vicious. Every available long-range bomber is sent into the air. The missile attacks on Ukrainian cities, which were already devastating, ramp up to an apocalyptic level of violence. For the first time, Russia begins to systematically target the things that allow a society to function: dams, water purification plants, and food storage facilities, in an attempt to create a humanitarian disaster so severe it will force Kiev to pull its troops back. At the same time, the Russian military starts a massive redeployment. Elite units are pulled from Chechnya, Syria, and even the Kaliningrad exclave. The grinding offensive in the Donbass is stopped, and those troops are rerouted north to form a blocking force which will become the hammer to smash the Ukrainian invasion. The skies over Kursk and Belgorod become the most dangerous airspace on the planet, as the Russian Air Force is thrown into the battle with one mission: destroy the Ukrainian forces no matter the cost. The Kremlin's strategy is clear: escalation. It will burn its own country to destroy the invaders and prove that any attack on Russia will be met with overwhelming force. The world watches a fractured alliance. News of the invasion sends a shockwave across the globe. At the United Nations, the Security Council meeting turns into a bitter shouting match. In Washington, London, Berlin, and Paris, phones ring in the middle of the night as leaders hold emergency meetings. The Western alliance, which had been so united in supporting Ukraine's defense, is now dangerously split. The United States finds itself in an impossible spot. Publicly, the White House puts out a short statement calling for all forces to de-escalate, a chilling and noticeable change in tone. Privately, they are furious. While they had given Ukraine the okay for limited tactical strikes inside Russia for self-defense, they never imagined or approved a full-scale invasion and occupation of Russian territory. The administration is torn between its promise to stop Ukraine from collapsing and its deep-seated fear of a direct conflict with a nuclear-armed Russia. In Europe, the split is even wider. Eastern European nations and the UK quietly show they understand Ukraine's desperate move, seeing it as a justified response to Russian aggression. But in Paris and Berlin, there is horror. Leaders there see Ukraine crossing a fatal red line, one that could drag all of Europe into a massive war. They worry that Putin's nuclear threats, which many had seen as a bluff, might now become a terrifying reality with Ukrainian tanks on Russian soil. The very foundation of Western support starts to crack. The flow of ammunition and spare parts, already a tricky logistical issue, becomes tangled in political tension. Secretly, some European leaders start sending signals to Kyiv. If they keep pushing deeper into Russia, they might find their supply lines from the West mysteriously running dry. Ukraine made its gamble, and in doing so, it has made its allies wonder if the price of victory is one they're willing to pay. The initial shock of the invasion is over, and the world is now balancing on a knife's edge. Ukrainian forces are deep inside Russia, the Kremlin is getting ready for total war, and the Western alliance that backed Kyiv is starting to come apart. We're just beginning to see the ripple effects of this one desperate decision. But before we explore the brutal reality on the ground and the terrifying next phase of this conflict, a quick word. If you find these explorations of alternate history and strategy compelling, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's the best way to support our work and make sure you don't miss our next look at the moments that could have changed the world. The grind. A quagmire of our own making. Back on the frozen fields of the Kursk Oblast, the glory of the initial Ukrainian attack quickly disappears. The reality of trying to sustain an offensive deep inside enemy territory sinks in. and it's a logistical nightmare. Every drop of fuel, every artillery shell, every medical kit has to be trucked down long, exposed roads that are now under constant attack from the enraged Russian Air Force. What started as a lightning-fast advance grinds to a halt. The Ukrainian forces, so brilliant in their attack, now face the grim task of holding their ground. Occupying a Russian city, even a small one, is completely different from liberating a Ukrainian one. The local population is hostile. Every shadow could be hiding a partisan, and Russia's security service, the FSB, works from the inside to organize resistance and sabotage. The Ukrainian soldiers are no longer seen as liberators. In the eyes of the locals and much of the world, they are occupiers. Militarily, the fight becomes a brutal attritional slog, a hellish mirror image of the battles for Bakhmut and Avdiivka. The newly mobilized Russian forces, though poorly trained, are thrown into the battle in human waves. Their job isn't to win, but to die in place, bogging down Ukraine's elite brigades and bleeding them dry. Russia, which couldn't take Kiev, now shows it's willing to turn its own city of Sudzha into a fortress of rubble just to trap and destroy the Ukrainian army. The strategic trap is sprung. Ukraine's best units, the very soldiers needed to defend its own heartland, are now stuck in a bloody, resource-draining battle on Russian soil. They can't advance, but retreating under fire would be a disaster, likely turning into a full-blown rout. They got the shock they wanted, but they didn't account for Russia's single greatest strategic asset: a nearly infinite tolerance for its own casualties and a willingness to sacrifice its own people and infrastructure to grind an enemy into dust. The abyss. The nuclear ultimatum. Weeks drag into a month. The battle for the Kursk salient is a meat grinder, chewing up men and machines at a horrifying rate. Ukrainian casualties are staggering. Russian losses are astronomical. On the world stage, frantic diplomatic efforts to secure a ceasefire go nowhere. Kiev won't give up its only bargaining chip, and Moscow refuses to negotiate while foreign troops are on sovereign Russian territory. It's in this moment of bloody stalemate that the Kremlin decides to play its final card. While the invasion is a military quagmire for Ukraine, it's also a political disaster for Putin. The war is no longer a distant affair, and the growing number of coffins returning from Kursk, this time filled with mobilized civilians, starts to cause real unrest. Facing a crisis of legitimacy, the Kremlin turns to the one tool it has left that guarantees it can change the game: nuclear weapons. The Russian ambassador to the United Nations delivers a sealed letter to the Security Council. At the same time, a public announcement is broadcast from Moscow. The message is crystal clear. Russia's official nuclear doctrine allows for the use of nuclear weapons in response to a conventional attack that threatens the very existence of the state, or more recently, poses a critical threat to its sovereignty and territorial integrity. The Kremlin declares that the armed occupation of its sovereign territory is just such a threat. The ultimatum is delivered. The government in Kiev has 48 hours to begin a full and unconditional withdrawal of all its forces from the territory of the Russian Federation. Failure to comply will be met with a response that will end the conflict permanently. This is not a bluff, the Russian president declares, echoing a phrase he used years earlier. But this time, with Ukrainian soldiers occupying Russian cities, the world believes him. Global intelligence agencies go on high alert. Satellites detect tactical nuclear warheads being moved from central storage bunkers to launch bases in southern Russia. For 48 hours, the world holds its breath, facing a nuclear countdown many thought was a relic of the Cold War. Stock markets crash. Cities around the world test their nuclear warning sirens for the first time in a generation. The desperate Ukrainian gamble to break a stalemate has instead brought humanity to the edge of the abyss. The new reality, the bitter peace. Those 48 hours are among the most tense in modern history. Frantic back-channel phone calls fly between Washington, Beijing, and Moscow. China, Russia's most powerful partner, sees its own interests threatened by a nuclear war and applies immense private pressure on the Kremlin, consistent with its stated opposition to nuclear use in the conflict. In the final hours, a deal is reached. It's ugly, brutal, and it satisfies no one. Under immense international pressure and with the clear threat that all Western support will be cut off, Ukraine agrees to withdraw its forces. In return, Russia agrees not to use its nuclear arsenal. There are no victory parades. Ukrainian troops pull back across the border, leaving behind a trail of destroyed equipment and thousands of their dead. They proved they could strike deep into Russia, but the price was unbearable. Their army is shattered, their relationship with key allies is in tatters, and they now face a fully mobilized, vengeful Russia across a newly fortified border. For Russia, the regime survives, but it's a Pyrrhic victory. The myth of Russian military invincibility is not just broken, it's buried in the mud of Kursk. The country is now a paranoid fortress on a total war footing, completely cut off from the West. The initial patriotic rush from the mobilization turns sour as the true scale of the losses becomes clear, planting the seeds of future instability. For the world, the legacy is fear. The nuclear taboo has been violated in all but deed. The entire framework of deterrence has been shaken to its core. A new, far more dangerous and unstable Cold War begins. The conflict in Ukraine isn't over, it's simply frozen on a knife's edge, with both sides exhausted, bloodied, and staring at each other across a chasm of mistrust, forever haunted by how close they came to wiping each other out. Conclusion. So, what's the takeaway from all this? In the real world, the war in Ukraine remains a brutal fight for survival and sovereignty. But in the alternate reality we've explored, a single, desperate decision to invade Russia didn't lead to a spectacular victory. Instead, it led to a strategic catastrophe. The bold gamble was tactically brilliant for a moment, but it proved to be strategically disastrous. It dragged Ukraine's best forces into a quagmire, fractured the Western alliance, and brought the world closer to nuclear Armageddon than at any point since 1962. It served as a horrifying lesson that in the high-stakes game of geopolitics, sometimes the boldest moves are the ones that lead directly to disaster. What do you think? Was there any way this invasion could have succeeded, or was it doomed from the start? Let us know your theories and alternate scenarios in the comments below. And if you appreciate these in-depth looks into what-if history, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.